Welcome to Elevate, the masterclass where we dissect the elements of exceptional achievement and lifestyle design with a focus on personal growth and real estate investing. Now, here's your host, Tyler Chesser.
Elevate Nation, welcome back. This is Tyler Chesser. I'm so thankful to have you here, and I'm blessed and grateful to be joined by Chris Porter today. And if you know anything about Chris Porter, you know you're in for a real treat. If you don't know anything about Chris Porter, let me just tell you, he wrote a book called Big Shifts Ahead, which is over my right shoulder here if you're watching on YouTube. So an amazing book all about, really about demographics, about trends, about migration, about, consumption patterns. And, it's really a must read for business owners, real estate investors, entrepreneurs alike. So you definitely want to read that book, but we're going to dive into what big shifts are ahead now, because this book was written, before COVID-19, before 2020, became such a bizarre year that it has become in so many different ways. So I'm excited to dive in to what big shifts are ahead now and what should we, how should we skate to where the puck is going, so to speak. And so I want to ask you the question that I always ask. Are you ready to take it to another level? Because we're absolutely going to do that today. We're absolutely going to be diving into the mind of an expert and really talking about, how can we elevate our results in our real estate portfolio, in our businesses, and get ahead of where massive shifts are occurring. And, we're absolutely experiencing a life-changing year, not only from a personal level, but from a business level. And so really excited about sharing this content with you today. And I want to welcome you back to the show where we sit down for mind-expanding conversations with influential authorities in real estate, as well as top experts in other industries and disciplines. And as you know, it is our mission to identify and apply how the best of the best raise the bar personally and professionally to achieve greatness in real estate and beyond. And you know this, but I have to remind you every single time, we will distill the mindset, the habits, the routines, the systems, the tools, the strategies. We're going to really be talking a lot about strategy today and so much more from an individual like Chris Porter, an individual who is really elevating to a life without limits and allowing others to elevate to a life without limits through his consulting, through the information that he distills as he reads the tea leaves and really, coalesces so much important data and information to make decisions so that you can elevate to a life without limits. At the end of the day, you've got to arm yourself with the appropriate information so that you can be thoughtful and strategic in how you're growing your business and how you're making decisions in your life, in your business, and so on and so forth. So this is a masterclass for leaders and those looking to achieve uncommon results and purposeful outcomes through real estate investing, personal growth, other ventures, and most importantly and ultimately in their lives. If you appreciate what my team and I are doing, be sure to subscribe to the show, give us a 5-star rating if you're so inclined, and leave a review of what you are specifically taking away from the show. I always love to hear that, and it really fills up my soul, so I certainly appreciate you listening. And if you're enjoying it, go ahead and give us a review and subscribe so you're notified. Again, we come out with new shows every Tuesday and Friday, so I'm super blessed to be able to share that with you. And so anyway, enjoy this wide-ranging and thought-provoking conversation with Chris Porter. So with that said, I want to introduce you to Chris Porter, who is a Senior Vice President and Chief Demographer at John Burns Real Estate Consulting, a boutique firm that helps executives make more informed residential real estate decisions. In his role, Chris helps the firm's clients understand the role demographics play in shaping the demand for housing in the short and long term, as well as demographics' impact on the overall economy. Along with CEO John Burns, Chris co-authored Big Shifts Ahead, Demographic Clarity for Businesses, which is a phenomenal book written to help executives make sense of the seemingly confusing topic of demographics, which is such a big driver of demand, not just for housing, but for so many goods and services. Chris is based in Orange County, California, where he lives with his wife and 3 young daughters. Chris, welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
Doing well, Tyler. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. We were just talking before the show here, and just want to, extend some gratitude to you guys for doing what you do. Obviously, shedding light on so much, complexity out there, whether it's related to demographics or behavioral shifts. I mean, certainly appreciate everything you guys do. And, with all that said, tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself behind the bio. Like, who is Chris Porter as a man?
Yeah, so I'm a Midwesterner at heart. I was kind of raised in the Midwest in Michigan, and even though I've now lived outside of the Midwest more than I've lived in it, I still go back to those roots. And when people ask me where I'm from, I say I'm from the Midwest. But been out here in California now, Southern California, for the last 15 years. Really came out here for this job, and I've been there now for 15 years. John Burns Real Estate Consulting. We provide really analysis and advice to anybody who's invested in housing in one shape or another. Focused on the U.S., we do for sale, we do for rent, but really trying to understand what ultimately drives the demand for housing and where is that growth going to come, and just help our clients make better informed decisions and give them more confidence in those decisions they're making about how they're investing their time and their money.
So how did you get into that? I mean, what interests you about that line of work, just out of curiosity?
So kind of a roundabout way. I did some financial consulting after college for a few years, and then went back to school and got a master's degree in journalism. I'd always kind of dabbled in journalism in high school and college, and always found it really interesting. And so I did a 1-year master's program in journalism, and it was in Chicago, and I knew I wanted to stay in Chicago. I knew I wanted to be in journalism. And so I found this company that did business-to-business magazines. I was assigned to the group that did magazines for home builders and remodelers. And I didn't know anything about those industries, but I knew something about journalism, and I knew something about digital journalism specifically. And they said, we can teach you the industry. And so I got to learn about the industry that way, just kind of absorbing it through as we were creating content. And John Burns was a contributing columnist to the magazine and to the website that I work for. And we just got to know each other over the couple of years I was there. And as he was looking to grow his business, he was kind of a one-man shop, had grown to about 4 or 5 people by the time we started having a conversation. And just one day out of the blue, kind of got a call from him saying, what do you think about California? And I said, I'd actually never been to California before. And I came out here in the middle of February. I left Chicago in the middle of February, came to California. It was brilliant marketing on his part. And I was sold on California. So, I came at it from a journalism background, learned about the industry, involved in the industry, and then it kind of comes full circle when we wound up writing a book about housing and demographic demand.
Yeah, it absolutely did come full circle there. And it's starting to all make sense to me now. I mean, what a great book. And you guys have really shed so much light on the fact that, consumer behavior and just behavior in general shifts, and it continues to shift. And when you guys wrote the book, there were absolutely some big shifts occurring. And of course, 2020, has been, a total game changer in many different capacities. So what I'd love to really focus our conversation on today to a large degree is, what else are we seeing? I mean, what other shifts should we expect, coming out of this pandemic? And who knows, maybe we are coming out of the pandemic. Maybe we've still got quite a bit to go here. And obviously we've got, societal changes in different ways, but, we also have an election coming up. We have an economy that, we're still trying to get an understanding of where we truly are. You look at Wall Street, you look at Main Street, and perhaps there's a lot of differences there. So, where should we start? I mean, how do we make sense of this, and how do we skate, ahead of where the puck is going, so to speak, as real estate investors, as entrepreneurs, and thinking ahead and making appropriate decisions to get ahead of the game here?
That's a great question. That's a lot of questions in there, but yeah, I want to even take a step back just a little bit and talk about sort of why we wrote the book. We just felt there was a lot of conversations out there around cocktail tables, around the dinner table, about here's what the boomers are doing, or here's what the millennials are doing. And quite frankly, I don't know that anybody could define what a millennial was. I mean, you ask a room full of 30 people, how do you define millennial? And you get 30 different answers. And so we said, if we want to project what's going to happen in the future, and really that's what our clients pay us for, is help them understand what the future looks like for their businesses. If you want to understand that future, we've got to at least level the playing field. Let's have some common terms that we can all agree upon, and help just bring some real clarity to these demographic conversations. We know that real estate is heavily dependent on demographic trends, but quite frankly, every business that relies on household formation, household demand, that is all this demographic conversation is relevant to them as well. And so that's ultimately what drove the genesis of this book, is how do we clarify this and bring some sense to this conversation, so that we can make better predictions about the future. And as we went through that, we identified here's a number of real big trends that we see are already occurring or that are coming down the pike based on, an aging in place of the population, or, things we see in terms of immigration, in terms of the economy, in terms of government policy. So we really kind of looked at 4 big areas: government policy, economic conditions, advances in technology, and then just sort of these general societal shifts. We look at the age of marriage or the rate at which people are having kids. So those kinds of things all really influence demographic trends. And we said, let's put some real numbers behind these instead of just having a generic conversation. Here's what the boomers are doing because this is what my parents are doing, or here's what the millennials are doing because my kid is doing this and he's a millennial. And so we said, if we can put some real numbers behind this, make some categories or some terms that everybody can at least understand where we're coming from, and we get it a level playing field, then we can start really projecting what's going to happen in the future. And so that's sort of where that genesis for the book came from. And then as we think about the future, and I have to give full credit to one of my colleagues, Michaela Sharp, who has given really a lot of thought about this. How does the COVID era affect some of these demographic shifts going forward? I think what we have to do is really kind of look at what was already happening prior to COVID, and then figure out how do the behaviors that we're forming during this pandemic impact, how do they accelerate or decelerate those trends? And that's ultimately going to help us make some decisions about how those trends then continue in the future. And she gives this great analogy. She says, I think we're all inclined to think that COVID created grocery delivery service, right? So everybody's getting their groceries either delivered to them or, somebody goes and does their shopping for them at the store and you just go and drive up and pick it up. And she says, that's not really the case. We already had this in place beforehand. It's just now accelerated by COVID. And so we want to be cognizant of that as we're thinking about the future. We talk about working from home a lot. I mean, a lot of people are working from home. There's a lot of people who can't work from home. The percentage of the workforce that's working from home today is probably not going to be the percentage of the people that are working from home 3 years from now or even a year from now. And so we can't just take what's happening right now in the midst of an emergency situation and use that as our assumption for the future. We have to kind of think about, is this a temporary change or is this going to be more of a permanent thing?
This episode of Elevate is brought to you by CF Capital, a real estate investment firm formed by myself and my partner, Brian Flaherty, where we invest in multifamily real estate communities across the Southeast United States. If you'd like to learn more about our approach, our mission, our acquisition criteria, and how you can learn more about future opportunities, visit cfcapllc.com. Again, that's cfcapllc.com. Right. Yeah. And I agree with you as far as the acceleration of trends. It seems to be, the biggest piece of what's happened this year thus far, especially you look at a technological shift, right? One of the big four influencers that you guys talk about, obviously, and just recapping those from a government standpoint, from an economy standpoint, technology and societal shifts are the big four influencers to, trends from a demographic standpoint. And I think it is important to just recap as well, is that you can break down those generations. Like when you say millennial, I mean, that's a big range of, age ranges, and same thing, for baby boomers. And so really, kind of dialing in, from a, each decade is really a big difference. And you think about, how the economy has been for folks who, maybe considered baby boomers or maybe, had born in, were born in the 60s or the 50s or whatever. They had a different experience. And so they've made different decisions based on that kind of stuff. And I think it's very fascinating. So, one of the big things that I find to be interesting about the pandemic has been, work from home. You mentioned work from home, and a lot of folks are, perhaps maybe a year from now or 2 years from now may or may not still be working from home. But I do think that there will be a large, acceleration in that pattern. And so you look at a place like, San Francisco as an example, right? You got a lot of folks who live in San Francisco because of the, technology job opportunities. And so obviously housing demand skyrockets. And so supply and demand, you have a very high cost of living. And so then folks are saying, well, wait a minute, I can still do this job. I can still earn a great living, but I don't have to live here. And so let me look for a different place to live and, keep more of what I earn and have maybe a better quality of life. And so I'll be interested to see how this shakes out. But I mean, have you put any thought to that sort of shift as one particular item?
Yeah. And I think we came up with this newsletter we called The Great American Move. And the whole idea behind that was, during this time, I think we're going to see a number of either households or businesses or both relocating as a result of just the way things have changed. I think people want to be closer to family. For us, certainly, we've missed being close to family, and we got a chance to visit with some of those this last week, and it was hard leaving because we hadn't seen them in 6 months. And So I think some of those family ties are going to be a little bit stronger. And, I was actually talking with our CEO this morning about, we've been saying for a while that the new amenity in retirement is not the golf course anymore. It's being near your kids and near your grandkids. And I think this only accelerates that. I think people want to be close to family. They realize the importance of home and the importance of family during this time. So things like that, I think, definitely get accelerated during this time. In terms of work from home, I think it's going to change floor plans a bit, or at least the types of homes that people are desiring. They may want to have that extra bedroom that they can use as a home office. Maybe they were making do with a space at the kitchen table or, the dining room table or something like that. But now, if they're going to be working from home more often, they want a dedicated space where they can actually close the door and maybe keep some of that noise out. We found, as we looked at home offices, that was a big factor for people, having that door that you can actually close and maintain some quiet. So it's a big thing. And so I think, as people are thinking about how the world will change and how they want to live, it only affects not just where they want to live, but also the homes that they live in. They'll make some decisions around that are influenced by this pandemic for sure.
So outside of the accelerated trends that were already identified to a large degree, is there anything new that you guys are seeing on the landscape based on this? Let's face it, it's been a black swan event, right? In many different capacities. Is there any new trends that you're seeing?
There are some. I've really been focused on what were the things that were already occurring. And there's been a lot of talk about, people moving out of the cities and into the suburbs. We've actually been seeing that happen for the last several years. As we look at the biggest cities in the country, the growth rate in those countries has been slowing for several years now. And I think a lot of that is due to the millennial population is aging to those family formation years. They want their kids to be in a good school district. They want to have a bigger house and a bigger yard for their kids to play in. And so we were seeing them already move to the suburbs prior to this. Again, I think this kind of comes under gets magnified under the lens of COVID. And so we'll see more emphasis on it, but it was something that was already occurring. And so that's a way that I want to think about this. What were the trends that we saw happening already? And how does COVID behaviors, like I said, accelerate or decelerate those?
Right.
We're big on suburban growth. We think that's the way of the future. Not to say that the cities won't grow as well, but we do think that it's time for the suburbs to maybe capture a little bit bigger share as we go forward.
Yeah. Speaking of suburban, one thing I love that you guys coined was surban, right? You coined the new phrase of surban, which is, you'll have to describe that for the audience a little bit better than I will. So I won't butcher that for you, but talk a little bit about that. Are you still seeing that to be an accelerated trend here as well in terms of, how that trend is really kind of metastasizing?
Yeah. So I think the concept of surban was just urban conveniences in traditionally suburban environments. I think we saw a lot of suburbs look at the success that big cities had by investing in their downtowns. And they said, we want some of that same success as well. And so you do see some investment that has occurred in small suburban downtowns, really trying to create an authentic downtown atmosphere where you've got walkable retail, walkable, restaurant, you got a vibrant restaurant scene. You've got maybe a mix of employment and residences all in the same place. The way I like to describe it, you don't necessarily need a car during the week because you can walk to work, you can bike to work, bike to the stores, walk to the stores, but you might want a car on the weekends to get out of town. And so the idea that you have sort of that work, live, play all in the same area and it's in the suburbs, it's a concept that, is commonly referred to as mixed use, but quite frankly, does anybody really want to say I live in a mixed use community? It just doesn't sound, I don't know, it doesn't sound right. So we came up with this term. And we said, it's hard to quantify what a suburban area is, but you kind of know it when you see it and when you feel it. And I've had a chance to tour the country in my job and really see some of these mini downtowns and suburban areas that have really had great success in drawing both business and also drawing people to live there as well.
Yeah. No, well, all us real estate entrepreneurs, we love the phrase mixed use. Come on. It's like, come on, everybody get on board here. But yeah, there's definitely a level of, it's a nice phrase, nice branding for a suburban sort of, center core or what have you. But, one thing I find to be fascinating, I got into my professional life as a marketer because I was always fascinated with, consumer behavior and psychology behind consumption. And I think about, this accelerating trend of retail consumption, and you look around and you see, retailers going out of business left and right, and you see Amazon thriving, I mean, to a larger degree than they ever have. And so, I mean, how does that impact cities? How does that impact traffic patterns, and what becomes a valuable piece of real estate versus what becomes, a much less valuable piece of real estate? And how does that impact, occupancy and all of these different things? I mean, what kind of thought have you put to that?
Yeah, I was just talking with our CEO about this morning. You look at the companies that have been really successful during this pandemic, and it's clearly a lot of the tech companies, Amazon and the delivery service, have really done quite well. I think stores are not dead, but I think we're going to have to rethink some of the retail models. We've definitely seen stores close. We've seen people buying more things online, and already, that was a growing trend for sure, but I think it's again become accelerated during this time. So maybe the retail, storefront isn't quite as important as it once was, and what's going to fill that space. And so we've done a lot of talk about suburban and the idea that there might be some other uses. I mean, certainly the malls have gotten a lot of press about this is really great, valuable land. That's, the malls are, at least in some areas, have not succeeded, and they're planning to tear them down and put in some retail, put in some residential, maybe a different kind of retail in its place. And so there has been some of that already occurring, and I think we'll probably see more of that as we go forward.
Yeah, no, I think it's super important just to pay attention and to be ready to be adaptable, right? If you look across the landscape, it's what can we do to repurpose this opportunity? If you're a retail investor or you're a general real estate practitioner and you find an opportunity that may have made sense in a previous market, but now it needs to be repurposed to, shift towards what the demands of the marketplace are. Obviously there's going to be vast opportunities perhaps. And I think the other thing that's important to look at is, what's happening with the economy. I mean, you look at unemployment to a huge degree. I mean, it's something that we've never seen before. And, how does this shift really kind of metastasize over the next decade plus? And what does this do to, consumer wealth or consumption patterns and, liquidity and all of these different things? And I think about that is, the reason why I think that way is, what does occupancy look like? What is it, does this drive, a higher demand for rentals or otherwise, or does it drive a higher demand for, purchasing single family homes because people are placing a higher degree of importance on their primary residence? And so what do you say to that? I mean, obviously there's no silver bullet to this answer, but how do you look at that question?
Were you listening to my conversation with John this morning? Because you're asking all the exact questions we were just talking about. We are hearing from our builder clients, like, this is the best housing market that they've experienced in their careers. There is demand. People want to say, look, if we ever have to go through something like this again, I don't want to be stuck in a house that I don't like. And so and quite frankly, we've got mortgage rates now that begin with the 2. Like, this is the buying opportunity of a lifetime for many people. And so we are seeing real strength on the for sale side. Now it remains to be seen how much of that is just catch up from, those few months where we had very slow sales. We had no traffic going through the model homes and that sort of thing. But, I think there's really some opportunity on the for sale side. That said, we're also seeing, strong occupancies on the for rent side as well, both in the apartments and on the single family rentals. There's been a lot of talk in the press about missed rent payments, and actually it's not been that bad compared to, to even before prior to COVID. I mean, we've seen a little bit of a dip in people paying their rent on time, but it's not, 30%. It's small percentages that we're talking about. So I think the for rent side is strong as well. I do want to say though, that I think we're in a little bit of a time where we're calling it the artificial economy, where we've got so much government stimulus that's come in and really helped keep people paying their rent. I mean, we can talk about $600 a week in unemployment benefits above what they're getting from the state. That's a huge boost. And we saw headlines talking about people who were not going back to work because they were making more money in unemployment than they were working. And so the government stimulus has been tremendous. And I think it's saved us from a lot of distress in the market. I'm kind of thinking about what happens when some of that government stimulus starts to dissipate and go away. And so, I think we'll probably see a little bit more distress in the market once that does start to go away. But this is playing out much better than I think we thought it would. And for sure, I think a lot of people thought it would. And that is really helped by the government stimulus. The one caveat I would say to that, though, is that, if this was the solution, then the government would be writing checks all day long to keep the economy afloat, right? So there's got to be something on the other side of this, and maybe that's inflation, but there's something on the other side of this that we're going to wind up paying for somehow in one shape or form. But as for right now, I think things are playing out better than we thought that they would have.
Yeah. And I could not agree more with that. I mean, it's almost like, each month it's like pleasant surprise, okay, we're kind of making it through this thing. But, obviously a lot of people are having extreme challenges in this time as well, even with government stimulus. And, you look at so many businesses, going bankrupt and all of these different things. So you definitely, our heart goes out to those people, and there's no doubt about that. And at the same time, thinking of what are the potential alternate futures that we may experience, if all of this goes bad, or if it continues to go the way it has, and it's like, okay, well, this is great, and the housing market is strong, the rental market is strong, maybe it'll continue to be that way as it's backstopped by government stimulus. And perhaps you look at it, we've had economists on the show, we've had others who are thoughtful in terms of where this is going, and experience in terms of making predictions. And obviously investors have to make predictions to a large degree, but what is possible here? What is possible from here on out? Obviously, if we experience a V-shaped like recovery that many have said is possible, or a U-shaped recovery, or a W, or even an L, right? You look at perhaps an extended, recession, or even perhaps a depression. I mean, we have no idea what's going to happen, in the election this year as well. So, I mean, considering best, middle and worst case scenarios, I mean, how do you envision the future from a housing perspective? And is there any way that you can even make that prediction today? But I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so there's a couple things. One that's really different this time is just the sheer number of temporary layoffs. We've never seen a surge like that. And these are people who are saying, you know what, I've been told I'll get my job back, or I have a return date in mind that my employers told me. We've never seen this kind of level. And for me, I have to wonder, if you ask the employee and you ask the employer about the prospects of that person coming back to work, are they the same? Does the employee think, oh, my prospects are pretty good at coming back? Would their employer tell you the same thing? And so I think that's the thing I'm really keeping my eye on, is how many of these temporary jobs or temporary job losses ultimately become permanent job losses. I've been actually really pleasantly surprised by how much that has come back, but we're still at levels we've never seen of people being laid off temporarily. So that's something I'm keeping an eye on. Our thought was, and again, I'm not great at predicting the future of medicine either, but we kind of came up with this idea of what we call the reverse J, where we kind of, I'm going to see if I can get this right on the Zoom call here, but it kind of comes back up, and then maybe it kind of goes down a little bit and comes back up. And each time as it comes back up, it comes up back a little bit higher. But the idea is, if we have to go through instances like this, again, where we have to shut down for a while or lock down for a little while, we may see things slow for a bit, and then they start to come back, and we see things slow down and come back a little bit. So it's not going to be a straight line. I don't think it's going to be a complete V recovery. And one thing that John has been doing a great job of saying is, we really kind of have to look at this in three different ways. It's the medical recovery. What is the prospects for health recovery? What is the prospect for the general economy recovering, and what is the prospects for housing to come back? And so, those are really three different conversations. And so we are looking at those three things differently and individually, but ultimately that's going to help us drive they influence each other and help us drive our forecasts. But those are three different recoveries that we're looking at.
Yeah. And the fascinating thing about all this is that, you look back on human history and you say, wow, human beings are resilient and they adapt. When challenges are faced, we adapt accordingly. And so I think that's why this discussion is so interesting, is because, it's not the end of the world. I mean, I don't think that way. And I'm sure many of the listeners don't as well. It's like, where's the opportunity here, and where will the shifts occur? So being thoughtful and thinking about that is super important. And I almost look at, your all's book as a bit of a manual in how to think about this and how to approach this. And one of the things I found fascinating is you talk about, the big four influencers, right? But they occur during people's five main life stages. And you talk about, childhood, early career, family formation, late career, retirement. So when big shifts occur, right, through government or through economy or through technology or societal shifts, during these different stages of people's lives, it impacts different generations differently. So, did you speak a little bit right now how everything in 2020 has really been impacting? I know that this is a very wide ranging question here, but if you were to touch on maybe two or three of the, largest population sort of, generations, what would you say to that?
Sure. Actually, I want to go back to one thing real quick. You talked about people adapting and what are the opportunities? And a client of mine told us this story, and I love it because it relates to housing. And he said, we went through a labor shortage in housing decades ago, and we were still plastering walls at the time. And because of a labor shortage, we had to come up with a more innovative way to do walls. And that's how drywall is invented. So like technology the human society adapted and figured out a better solution due to the problem that was being caused. And so I think you're exactly right.
That's huge. I appreciate that. I'm sorry. I really appreciate that because we have to look at it frame it as an opportunity because, challenges come, but they're a seed for a blessing for a greater benefit in the future. So I really appreciate you saying that.
Yeah. And I think, we're already seeing some advances in tech. We've been experiencing a labor shortage in housing. We didn't have enough, builders didn't have enough workers to build the homes. And so we're coming up with new technologies that are going to help us build those homes better and faster, and in ways that we can still build the number of homes that we need with maybe fewer workers. And so, I think that the pandemic is also going to influence not just the housing industry, it influences other businesses as well. We're going to learn, new things. We can do away with the things that aren't necessary, and we become more efficient at the things that are necessary. We've seen that in our own business, and it's really just a constant game of adapting to your circumstances. But I do want to come back to your question about sort of what are the different life stages, how are they impacted by some of these trends. I'm going to start with the retirees first off, and we've got this massive wave of people who are going to be turning 65 years old over this next decade. It's the oldest of the biggest number of boomers now starts to reach retirement age over this next decade. We are about to see the 65 plus population in the U.S. grow, I think 38% from 2015 to 2025. We've never seen a surge like that in our country before. And so, they're coming out of the workforce, most of them. Some are still staying in the workforce. I think in terms of pandemic, I think some are retiring early or earlier than they thought they would have. Maybe they're not working to 68. They said, I'm 65. I'm ready to retire, and I got laid off or I lost my job. It's okay. I can retire now. And so I think, and especially if their 401ks have largely recovered, after the stock market collapsed or went down, and now the 401ks are back up. I think we are seeing more people start to retire. And again, I come back to this idea, they want to be near their families. And so I think we will see some relocations, maybe accelerated for the older adults. One thing I'm really thinking a lot about is just the younger generations, whether it's elementary school kids or college age kids. Sort of what are their prospects for education and the workforce beyond that? We've definitely seen the education system disrupted as a result of this, with more kids learning from home, and quite frankly, unsure about what the next few weeks are going to entail, whether they're learning from home or they're learning in person. I think this is a great opportunity for the education system to really kind of think about what are the long-term prospects look like for a different model or some adjustments to the model for education. John was telling me today that in the UK, they're doing second grade classes over the TV. And so, all second graders in the UK are getting the same lesson. And it's not through internet, it's through the TV.
Wow.
He was telling me that today. I've not actually read about it, but I think that's an interesting idea. And so are there some opportunities or things we can take advantage of? My heart really goes out to like students in college. I mean, the college experience is such a formative part of your life, and to have that taken away, and then also, to be a graduating senior this last year and entering the workforce where you're not sure if you have an office to go to. And I don't know what it looks like for companies hiring people right out of college to work from home. We've always kind of said that for our own employees, that's something you kind of earn. You kind of have to prove yourself a little bit that you can be productive and work in an office environment. And then you sort of earn that right to be able to work from home, earn that flexibility. I think that's changed, but I got to think it's hard to enter the working world right now when there's just so many unknowns.
I agree. And also just the networking piece. It's like if you've already got an established network and you're really just building those relationships, I do feel like technology can allow you to continue to push that ball forward. But if you're trying to establish new relationships, I can see it being an extreme challenge, because it's like, who's this guy across the, the Zoom call here for me,
I think, and John and I were talking about this morning as well. I think it extends even beyond just sort of the business world, but just like interpersonal relationships have changed so much. And I think my family, we've been probably a little bit more on the conservative side in terms of going out and doing things. We really haven't seen anybody. And we went out and took a little trip this last week to visit some family out of state. And it was hard coming back because we just missed being around people, and having just even a week of being around others. It was so nice. And it was hard to come back from that and kind of go back to our not totally locked down lives, but at least, reduced interaction in person. And I think about even for my kids as well, just to see them, they play well with each other, but to see them playing with other kids, especially my 2-year-old who really has grown a lot in these last 6 months and has not had a lot of interaction with other, we didn't see a lot of interaction between her and other kids prior to that outside our family. And so that's just it was a lot of fun, and to see that, and then to kind of have to go back to the way we've been for the last few months, it's a challenge. And I think there are going to be some effects of that on interpersonal relationships.
No doubt.
Interact with people.
Yeah. And I think it's also interesting is that, as this persists, for a certain level of time, months and months and months at a time, human beings are very habitual. And when you do something for, who knows, Harvard says 66 days, other people say 77 days, 71, whatever, it becomes a habit, right? It becomes a routine, and your lifestyle becomes something entrenched, whether it's your neural networks or just the way that you live your life, it just becomes a new function of who you are. And so it takes time to kind of get out of that. And I find it to be fascinating is that, the new habits that are being formed, are sort of perhaps a seismic shift in the way that people behave from a consumer, perspective, and just from where they're migrating to and all these different things. And one thing that I do find to be interesting as well is I'd love to know your thoughts on, how immigration is impacted by this. Obviously, with this being a global pandemic and every nation really across the world has been impacted to one degree or another. Obviously, America has been impacted perhaps to a larger degree than many. And, it seems, at least you guys had talked about it in the book, is that, a lot of our population growth has come through affluent, global immigration. And so I'd love to know sort of what are your thoughts there, and has that accelerated or has that shifted in any different direction?
Sure. So we had basically described in the book, a third of the recent population growth was driven by immigration from other countries. So when you look at the net increase in people in our country, 1/3 of that was driven by immigration, as opposed to births minus deaths. And the census was actually forecasting that 1/3 of population growth for the next 10 years was going to be, again, driven by immigration. We've seen in the last few years that immigration numbers have started to decelerate and come down a bit, half the rate of which we were doing just a few years ago. And there's a number of different reasons for that. I think government policy plays a huge part in that. But we were starting to see those numbers already decline even before COVID. And now we've basically effectively shut down our borders for the time being. So that's only going to make 2020 look even more dramatic, I think. And then I just do wonder about, from a health perspective, or just, are we going to be more reticent to open our borders? And also, are we going to be seen as less friendly to immigrants? as a country? I don't know. I mean, that's just some of the things I'm thinking about. I do think we're not going to see, a third of our growth driven by immigration. And I think ultimately we're probably going to have slower growth in terms of the population as a result. And that's, hugely important for some markets that rely heavily on foreign workers or just residents to help their economy grow. And so, it affects certain markets more than others. But I do think that is probably going to contribute to a slowing of the growth in the U.S. Just in terms of our population and households.
Are you someone who's seriously looking to elevate your life, your business, your real estate portfolio, your cash flow, your deal opportunities, your access to opportunities, your network this year? Well, if that's you, then I invite you to visit coachwithtyler.com, because I'm currently opening up a few coaching spots for people like you who want to close the gap from where you are to where you want to be, and really expand that beyond your wildest dreams and explode your business, explode your deal opportunities, explode your vision for what you're looking to create. If that's you, I invite you to visit coachwithtyler.com. I really have to tell you that this is not for everyone. This is only for those who are decisive. They're committed. They're willing to do whatever it takes. They're willing to invest time, energy, and resources into themselves to get to where they want to be and to live a life without limits, to elevate to a life without limits, which is really what we're all about on this show. If that is you, again, I invite you to visit coachwithtyler.com. Again, that's coachwithtyler.com. Yeah. And from a real estate investing perspective, to me, it all boils down to supply and demand, right? I mean, is your demand growing, and is your supply, how is your supply? Is it growing, or is it shrinking, or is it staying flat? And I find it to be fascinating. I'm a multifamily real estate investor. And so we think about all of these factors. We think about international immigration. We also think about domestic migration. And one of the things you guys talked about is really, the Sun Belt states have experienced a great shift in terms of domestic migration from, other maybe more expensive locations, cost of living, obviously weather, all of these different reasons, perhaps even government influence there. So talk to me about that. I mean, is that continuing to just accelerate in that capacity, or any shifts that you're expecting from that perspective as well?
Yeah, I think you hit all the nails on the head right there. I think, the states in the South have also been really proactive in reaching out to other parts of the country and trying to get businesses to move to the South. You saw a lot of auto manufacturing go south. They're offering incentives for businesses to relocate, and affordability certainly plays into it. I think for the retiree living in the Midwest or the Northeast, the weather certainly plays into it. And so you are seeing those trends for the South. It was, again, a trend that has been occurring for decades. We've seen more and more of that growth to the South. But I do think from an affordability standpoint, and from weather, and really from even a job standpoint as well, I think we are continuing to see that migration occur. There's a great sort of out-of-the-box indicator that we use to look at this migration trends. There's a lot of lag in the migration data, but one of the things we do each month is we go and look at U-Haul trucks, and we say, what's the rate to move from DC to Houston, to rent a truck from DC to Houston, and then what's the cost to renting the truck the same way, or the reverse direction, so go from Houston to DC. And so if you see an area where they've got a lot of U-Haul trucks, that means that's where the migration is going to. And if there's an area where there's a shortage of U-Haul trucks, that's where people are leaving. And so that's actually been a really kind of cool indicator for us to at least think about this analogy, or the anecdotally. What are some ways that we can kind of think about how people are migrating in real time? And it's a kind of a neat little indicator we look at.
That's super interesting. I love that. And I'm almost like, I told you before the show, it's like I nerd out on this stuff. I find it to be so fascinating. Are there any other really interesting indicators that you guys look at that show you sort of where potential future, demand may be growing in certain capacities, or is there anything else you point to?
I mean, job growth is ultimately the biggest one. So we're trying to keep on tabs, or on track of where jobs are growing. And that's the biggest indicator, I think, for where we can see the demand for housing going. And I think it's also really important to look at the aging of the population as well. And so that's in my role as demographer, I'm trying to really understand, okay, these are retiree heavy areas. We know that there's, a surge of retirees coming. What's the likelihood that they actually move to one of these areas? So I'm trying to keep tabs on life stage and age information. We also just, are looking a lot at the supply as well and sort of what is coming to market. Master plan communities that are being planned for the future. We do a lot of work in trying to help some of those move forward in terms of doing the due diligence or the feasibility work for those. But trying to really help understand who is their target demographic and is there enough of that that would potentially, enough that demographic that would potentially move to those locations.
Yeah, no, it's super fascinating. Is there any major technology shifts that maybe aren't readily apparent that you're kind of, really keeping your finger on the pulse to really identify if there's going to be any major shifts? I mean, obviously work from home is one that I think of, immediately. But is there anything outside of that you're really keeping tabs on?
Yeah, so two things I would say. One, and this is kind of still far out there, I think, but the driverless car. I do have to wonder what impact this is going to have on where people choose to live. Because if we've become such a car-centric society, if you can all of a sudden have an automatic, a driverless car that can take you from your home in the rural area to the job center in the suburbs or job center in the city, and you can work during that time, that makes that decision to move out more rurally a little bit more, a little easier. I don't know how far away we are from that. But the other thing that I also think is just in terms of real estate, that opens up a lot of prime real estate that I think is currently occupied by like car dealerships. It's occupied by gas stations. It's occupied by parking lots. So if we actually do move towards this society where we I have no idea how close we are to this, but where we become less car centric, I think there's a lot of prime real estate that can be opened up and repurposed for other uses. The other thing I'm thinking a lot about too is just sort of the home technology as well. And you can say we haven't made a ton of advancements in the way that we build a house, and we still build houses with nails and lumber and that sort of thing. And fundamentally, the house is very similar to the way we built it 50, 60 years ago. Obviously, there's been a lot of technological advancements in the building products that make them more energy efficient. And but I do see we are moving towards more of a sort of a modular off-site build process where maybe you're not manufacturing the entire home off-site, but you're manufacturing more parts of it off-site and then bringing it and piecing together on-site. And so we are starting to see some technologies that are emerging where, again, more parts of those homes are being assembled on-site or built off-site and then assembled on-site, which makes the build process smoother and also more timely as well. So those technologies are starting to emerge, and I think they will become more popular. I think some of the stigma that people may associate with, manufactured housing, there's nothing wrong with manufactured housing, but I think there's sort of a stigma in some people's minds associated with that. I think that's going away as they see really just how these products are more efficient and quite frankly can be more precise. I mean, when you've got machinery that can do this very precisely, it makes the build process a lot easier.
Yeah. And beyond that, I've even seen, 3D printers out there printing houses. And it's like, do we get to a point where you can print an apartment complex or something
right.
like that? I mean, it's absolutely fascinating to really think about. And I'm with you on driverless cars. I mean, I've got friends who've, drive Teslas and they've got functionality where they're kind of driverless to a certain degree on the highway and all these different things. So I think it's really interesting. And I think they've got updates to where it does become, largely driverless. So I think we're pretty close. We're closer than a lot of people think. And the other thing that I think is really interesting on this is you mentioned it a few times. You said prime real estate may become repurposed. And obviously that's the other pieces that I'm wondering about is, does prime real estate, does that need to be redefined? Because traffic patterns are what defines prime real estate to a large degree, obviously from a retail or, sometimes on multifamily from a visibility standpoint. So, I mean, have you thought about that at all in terms of redefining what prime real estate looks like in the future?
Yeah, ultimately, I think people want to be in great locations. And, that's kind of the mantra of the real estate business, right? It's location, location, location. I do think if we disrupt traffic patterns, you're right. We may see sort of a redefining of what prime real estate is. And it's going to, differ by person, by geography. But I do think you're right. There is maybe some redefinition that may come along with that.
Yeah, no, I love it. Chris, this has been outstanding. I really, really appreciate you taking time. I want to be respectful of your time. So we're going to transition into our rapid fire section. We call it the rare air questionnaire. It's all about being excellent. It's all about striving for greatness and really, expanding your levels of competency and bringing on folks like Chris onto your team so that you can truly understand, where's the puck going so that you can make strategic and thoughtful long-term decisions, because it's all about being successful long-term in real estate and in business, because, that's what it's all about. And obviously there's going to continually be shifts. So with all that said, the rare air questionnaire, let me just start off, obviously, as an author yourself. I always like to know, if you were to point to 2 or 3 of the most impactful books that you've read, whether it's business related or otherwise, what would those be?
Yeah, in terms of a book having an impact on my life, I think the book that we wrote impacted my life. It was a good 3 years of my life. I had 2 kids during that, and my wife had 2 kids during that time. But we, it was just one of those projects that the deeper we dug into it, the more fascinated we became by the data. And so that's actually, it sounds like I'm self-promoting here, but I have to say, that book has really impacted my life. And now it enables me to speak at conferences and talk with people like you about, just some of the research that we've done. So from a little bit of a self-promotional standpoint, I think that has had a big impact on me. Certainly, I'd be remiss to say, or to forget to mention the Bible. But I think from a business standpoint, or at least just kind of more of an educational or nonfiction standpoint, there's a book called Predictably Irrational by a behavioral economist named Dan Ariely. And he just challenges some of the notions that we have. We kind of, in economics, think a lot about, a rational person would do this. And he says, well, we don't always behave rationally. And so as a behavioral economist, he says, we don't behave rationally, but we tend to behave irrationally in the same patterns. And so he kind of looks at, why do we make the same mistakes over and over again instead of just doing things right? And so it was a fascinating book. And I kind of love the economist perspective on it, but then also the psychology behind it as well. Why do we do the things that we do? And when we make mistakes, why do we keep making those mistakes over and over again? So it's really expanded the way that I think about problems, and that's ultimately what I am. I'm a problem solver, and I like doing puzzles. And the way that John and I talk a lot about sort of our company and about my role specifically is I'm trying to figure out a puzzle. In some cases, I don't know what the puzzle looks like. You don't have that picture on the box like you do with a jigsaw puzzle always, and sometimes you're having to make some new pieces to kind of fit into that puzzle. But ultimately, that's what I'm trying to do. And so anything like that Predictably Irrational book, where it just gives me a little bit more insight into sort of the consumer mindset and rational thinking versus irrational thinking. I love that stuff. It's right up my alley.
That's awesome, man. And that's such a fun response too, because I can tell how impactful that book was to you. And I find that just the title itself to be extremely fascinating, predictably irrational. And, human beings, we are predictably irrational. And another book that I would just add onto this, just from a psychological perspective, and even taking it a step further in a negotiation perspective, is Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. And it's really about, human beings being irrational, because if you look at it, another book that I recommend for folks looking to really stack on their talent or skills in negotiation is Getting to Yes. And it was written by the folks at the Harvard negotiation project. And it is super valuable, but it is very rational. It's all about the rationality. It's all about the principles. It's about identifying the outcomes and separating those to, what's more important to you, what's more important to me. But at the end of the day, human beings are irrational. And I find it to be fascinating. And it really aligns with the work that you guys do to really understand the predictable irrationalities behind all of that. So super fascinating. And also I can tell that it was such a passion project for you guys to create the book that you did. So thank you again for doing that, and really enjoyed it myself. I know many others have as well. So it's awesome to hear that it was also impactful for you. But beyond that, and beyond sharing, obviously, what you do from a professional standpoint, what would you say is the biggest way that you elevate your life on a daily basis?
That's a great question. I think for me, it's, and I think this applies to both my personal life. It applies to work as well, but just kind of my mentality in life is like, how can I help? And I look for the opportunities where I can be of assistance, whether it's, doing something, taking on a project at work, or whether it's, doing something to help with the kids around the house, or, in my church. It's something that's really important to me. And I kind of just see those acts. I don't know. I don't want to sound, I want to be modest here, but I mean, like, just opportunities for volunteering or for helping people. And that's kind of where I think where my gifts are. And so that's sort of my mantra, I think, is just where, looking for those opportunities to help. How can I help?
Yeah. Your humility is an endearing quality. So kudos to you for that. And no, I love that. I love just that question of how can I help? How can I help? And it really kind of leads me into this next question, which is, what's the biggest way that you elevate others around you? Obviously, that's one big way. But what else would you say to that question? It's a good one. It's just one of those things where it's just, I don't know. I guess I'm pushing you beyond.
You are definitely pushing me out my comfort zone here. But, I think I try to look for those needs. Where are people, whether they're doing well and just need some help to getting even further, or whether they're having a hard time and just need some help to get back on their feet. So, I think I just kind of come from a mindset of like, I've been really blessed with what I have and what I can do, and how can I just share that with others? And so that's a big part for me, is just kind of looking for those opportunities to help. I don't know. It sounds very similar to my answer from the other question, but that's
not at all. No, I think it's great. I mean, it's identifying, because everybody has a challenge. Everybody has a challenge they're dealing with, and being willing to support that and being clear and thoughtful in that, I think, is super important. So I love that answer. And I love just our conversation today, Chris. Thank you so much for taking time. Is there any parting thoughts or words of wisdom that you share with Elevate Nation today?
No, this is a great podcast. I mentioned you beforehand. I listened to a few episodes before, recognized a few people that I, indirectly knew. And, so it's just, I really appreciate what you're doing and the message that you're putting out there, both from a business perspective, but also just for a life perspective as well. So just keep it up. I love it.
That's awesome, man. Thank you for the kind words. And thanks again for being on the show. Tell the listeners how they can learn more about what you do and your company and your consulting.
Sure. So our company is John Burns Real Estate Consulting. We are a nationwide firm. I think a lot of people think of us as sort of a Southwest-based firm or a California firm, but we really do work all over the country, and working in for sale and for rent housing. Our website is realestateconsulting.com. You can find a little bit more information about us there. Our book, which I thank you again for promoting a bit, was Big Shifts Ahead, and it's available for purchase. You can find it on the regular places, Amazon for sure. But bigshiftsahead.com is our website, and that just has a little bit of information about the book, some of our presentations, some of the graphics for our book, and you can even get it as an audio book. But there's so many charts and graphs in that thing. I really recommend getting the hard copy and going through it. I would also just recommend people, take it a chunk at a time. It's not necessarily a straight read through. We've gotten some comments, there's a lot of repetition between chapters, and maybe there is, but our idea was not that somebody would necessarily read it through in one straight shot, but maybe read one chapter at a time, kind of think it through a little bit, and then as you go to the next chapter and you recognize something from the previous chapter, like, oh yeah, that was a callback from before. So it's been really well received. I'm really excited that it's not just the real estate industry that's getting excited about it, but also we've got a lot of other companies and businesses, governments that are seeing really the benefits of understanding those demographics that are shaping our country, and hopefully we brought some clarity to that process for them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I highly recommend the hard copy. I've got it right here over my right shoulder here, if you're watching on YouTube. And the visuals in the book are amazing. And the charts, it makes it all so much more clear. And I think it is almost a living book. It's like one of those things that helps you think about, when the next, events occur, how can you think ahead? And how can you make decisions, and how can you be impactful and thoughtful in what you're doing and not miss the boat? Because look, man, I feel like things are accelerating faster and faster every single day, no matter what we're dealing with. And it's just a function of perhaps this modern society that we live in. But I just find it to be so fascinating. So we'll absolutely put links in the show notes of where you can find Chris, where you can find their company, where you can really buy the book. I mean, at the end of the day, just go get the book. It's going to be a great investment for yourself. But I also encourage you to re-listen listen to the show, because a lot of what we talked about is absolutely up to date, not only, but it's also actionable. Because, look, I took a lot of notes here, and I would highly encourage the listener to take notes as well. And how does this impact your business? How does this impact your partnerships, your future family, your family right now, or, whatever. I mean, at the end of the day, there's so much to take action on, and it may or may not be relevant for your real estate business. It may or may not be relevant for anything else you're doing. But I think identifying and opening your mind to opportunities is super important. And that's what we did today. So I encourage you to re-listen to the show, share this with someone else. You got to pay it forward. And let them know, hey, here are my top 3 key distinctions. Here's the top 3 things that I'm going to take action on. Tell me what you're going to take action on, because at the end of the day, the teacher really learns almost more perhaps than the student. So go out and share this with someone else and pay it forward. And at the end of the day, the most important piece is to take massive action. And with all that said, Chris, I just want to thank you again for being on the show.
You're welcome, Tyler. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Elevate Nation, we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Elevate. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate, review, subscribe, and pay it forward by sharing with a friend. Most importantly, take this opportunity to elevate your results by taking immediate action on what you learned. For more, visit elevatepod.com.